She spent her last $41 on a house no one wanted, until she found what someone was trying to hide. The wind off the lake cut straight through the broken windows as Lena Morrissey stepped inside for the first time. The floor creaked under her weight. The air smelled of damp wood and something older. This was all she had left. A collapsing cottage, a rusted key, and no way back. But something about the place didn't feel abandoned. It felt kept. If you were down to your last $41, would you take a risk like this? Or walk away? The diner had been closed for hours. The sign in the window still flickered, open in one corner, dark in the other, like it couldn't make up its mind. A thin layer of frost clung to the glass, blurring the empty booths inside. Somewhere behind the building, a loose piece of metal tapped against a wall in the wind. Slow, irregular, like a clock that had forgotten time. Lena Morrissey sat in her car and watched her own breath drift across the windshield. The engine was off. It had been off for a while. She held the money in her hands, 4 tens, 1 wrinkled dollar, and a scatter of coins that felt colder than the air itself. She counted it once, then again, then a third time, slower, as if the numbers might change if she gave them enough attention. $41. That was everything. She folded the bills carefully and slipped them back into her coat pocket, pressing her hand there for a moment, like she could keep them from disappearing just by holding still. The car creaked around her, old metal shrinking in the cold. The heater had stopped working sometime before dawn, and now the chill had settled deep into the seats, into the steering wheel, into her bones. In the rearview mirror, she could see the duffel bag. Faded blue canvas, one zipper missing its pull, a small tear along the seam where she'd stitched it twice already. It had belonged to her daughter. Not when she was grown. Before that. Back when it had been packed for sleepovers and school trips and weekends that never seemed long enough. Lena had kept it after everything else had been sorted, sold, or left behind. She wasn't even sure why. Maybe because it was the only thing that didn't feel final. She looked away. The memory sat too close to the surface these days. Everything did. Outside, the wind picked up, pushing dry snow across the empty lot in thin, restless lines. It scraped softly against the tires, against the doors. The kind of sound that made a place feel more alone than it already was. Lena shifted in her seat and pulled her coat tighter around her. She had been here since morning. Long enough to watch the sun come up pale and weak behind the trees. Long enough to see the one pickup truck pull in, idle for a minute, and leave again when it realized the diner wasn't opening. Long enough to replay the same conversation over and over. The manager hadn't even stepped outside. He'd stood just inside the lodge doorway, one hand on the frame like he didn't want the cold to follow him out. He'd looked past her more than at her, his voice careful, rehearsed. "Position's been filled," he'd said. Came down to timing. Timing. She had driven nearly 3 states for that job. Packed what little she had left into the trunk. Slept in the car one night to save money. Skipped meals without thinking about it too much. Timing. He hadn't apologized again after the first time. Hadn't asked where she'd come from. Hadn't asked where she was going next. And when she'd stood there a second too long, not arguing, not begging, just trying to understand, he'd shifted his weight, uncomfortable, and said, "Wish you the best," in a tone that meant the opposite. Then the door had closed. That was it. Lena let out a breath and watched it fade. $41. Gas or food. If she filled the tank, she could drive another 100 miles, Maybe more if she was careful. But then what? If she bought food she could eat tonight. Maybe tomorrow morning if she stretched it. But then she'd still be here. Or somewhere like it. She rested her forehead lightly against the steering wheel. For a moment, she didn't move. Didn't think. Just listened to the wind and the faint ticking of the cooling engine. And then, slowly, something else came back to her. Not a memory exactly, more like a feeling attached to one. A kitchen table, a cup of tea that had gone cold because neither of them had remembered to drink it. Her grandmother's hands, thin, steady, always doing something even when they were resting. You don't wait until you're out of options, the old woman had said once. You leave yourself one door open, even if you don't think you'll ever use it. At the time, Lena had laughed. She'd had a job then, a small apartment, a routine that felt permanent in the way ordinary things do when you're not paying attention. What door? She'd asked. Her grandmother hadn't answered right away. She'd gotten up, gone to a drawer, and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, creased from being opened and closed too many times. If you ever run out of road, she'd said, placing it in Lena's hand, there's a place. Lena had tucked it away without really reading it. Years had passed. Moves, bills, phone calls that got shorter, visits that got further apart. And then one day, there hadn't been any more visits at all. Now, sitting in a cold car with $41 in her pocket, Lena reached into the glove compartment. It took a moment to find it. Receipts, old insurance papers, a pen that didn't work anymore. And then there, the folded paper. She opened it carefully, as if it might tear if she rushed. The handwriting was the same. Small, firm, no wasted motion in the lines. An address. A few directions that didn't match any map she could remember. And one line at the bottom, written darker than the rest. No one wants it. That's why it's still there. Lena read it twice. Then a third time. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling something loose along the side of the diner. No one wants it. She let out a quiet breath. That makes two of us, she murmured, though there was no one there to hear it. Her hand tightened slightly around the paper. A cottage. That was what it had been called, though she barely remembered it. A place mentioned once or twice in passing, never important enough to ask about, never urgent enough to visit. A place no one wanted. She looked back at the empty parking lot, at the diner that wasn't opening, at the road stretching out past the trees, disappearing into the gray distance. Gas or food, stay or go. $41. Lena folded the paper again and held it in her hand for a long moment. Then she straightened in her seat, turned the key. The engine hesitated, just for a second, before catching. A low, uneven rumble filled the car. She didn't wait. Didn't give herself time to reconsider. She pulled out of the lot, the tires crunching over frozen gravel, and turned toward the road. The diner disappeared behind her without ceremony. No one watched her leave. The windshield fogged slightly as the weak airflow struggled against the cold. She wiped it with the back of her sleeve and kept her eyes on the road ahead. She didn't know what she would find. Didn't know if the place still existed. Didn't know if it would be any better than where she'd just been. But it was something. And right now, something was enough. The road stretched forward, pale and uncertain under the winter sky. Lena drove. The trees changed first. Thicker, taller, closing in on both sides of the road until the sky narrowed to a dull strip of gray above her windshield. Snow gathered in the branches, heavy and quiet, and every so often a clump would fall, breaking the stillness with a soft thud. She kept both hands on the wheel. The gas needle sat lower than she liked. She watched it without meaning to, the way a person watches a clock when they're waiting for something they can't stop. $41. Now less. She had put just enough in the tank to keep moving, not enough to turn back. The directions from the paper didn't match anything her phone could find. No signal half the time anyway. Just the old handwriting guiding her forward. Past the split in the road with no sign. Left where the pavement turned to gravel. Keep going when it feels like you've gone too far. She followed it exactly. By the time she saw the lake, it was late afternoon. It appeared suddenly between the trees, wide and gray, and stretching farther than she could see, its surface broken by slow, heavy waves that moved without urgency. The wind coming off it hit the car in long, steady pushes. Lake Superior. She hadn't seen it in years, not since she was young enough to think places like this stayed the same forever. The town came a few miles later, if it could be called that. A single main street, lined with buildings that leaned just slightly, as if tired from standing too long. A grocery store with a hand-painted sign. A bait shop. A gas station with one pump out of order and the other blinking uncertainly. No traffic. No voices. Just the sound of the wind moving down the street and the faint creak of something loose on a rooftop. Lena slowed as she drove through. A man standing outside the gas station turned his head to watch her pass. He didn't wave, didn't smile. Just watched. She didn't stop. The directions led her out the other side of town, down a narrower road that ran close to the water. The trees thinned there, replaced by low brush and patches of exposed rock. The lake stayed beside her, never quite still, never quite loud. Then the road turned to dirt. Ruts frozen solid, ice in the shaded parts. Her tires crunched and slipped, and she eased her foot off the gas, letting the car find its way forward. There was no sign, just the sense that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, even if it didn't make sense. And then, the house. It sat back from the road, just far enough to be missed if you weren't looking for it. Lena slowed, then stopped. For a moment, she didn't get out. She just sat there, engine idling, hands resting on the wheel. It was worse than she had imagined. The roof sagged in the middle, one side dipping lower than the other like it had given up trying to hold itself together. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood beneath gray and splintered. One window was boarded up. Another was cracked through the center, a jagged line catching the light. The porch leaned. Not dramatically, just enough that you noticed it without meaning to. A set of steps led up to it, one missing entirely, the others worn smooth by years of weather. The place didn't look abandoned. It looked forgotten. Lena turned off the engine. The silence that followed felt heavier than the drive had. When she opened the door, the cold came in fast, sharp and clean, carrying the smell of the lake, metallic, damp, and something older underneath it. She stepped out slowly. Gravel crunched under her boots. The wind pulled at her coat, pushed her hair back from her face, made her eyes water. She stood there for a moment, taking it in. This was it. This was the place no one wanted. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Well," she said quietly, her voice carried off almost immediately by the wind. "You weren't wrong." The paper in her pocket felt heavier now. After a minute, she turned back to the car. The legal office was in town. She had passed it on the way in, A narrow building wedged between the grocery store and what looked like a closed hardware shop. A small sign in the window. Nothing more. She drove back slowly. The same man at the gas station glanced up again as she passed, his eyes following her without expression. Inside, the office was warmer than she expected. Not warm enough to be comfortable, just enough to take the edge off the cold. Dark wood desk, filing cabinets that had seen better years, a clock on the wall ticking louder than it needed to, and behind the desk, Marcus Bell. He stood as she entered, smoothing a hand over his tie as if he had been expecting her all along. "Ms. Morrissey," he said, his voice even, practiced. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." Lena closed the door behind her. The room smelled faintly of paper and something older, dust maybe, or wood that had been sealed too long. "I got your message," she said. He nodded, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please, sit." She did. The chair creaked under her weight, the sound louder than it should have been in the quiet room. Marcus Bell picked up a folder from his desk and opened it with careful precision. "Your grandmother's estate has been settled," he said. "Took longer than expected. These things often do." Lena watched his hands. Neat, controlled, every movement measured. "There isn't much to distribute," he continued. "A few personal items, small sums allocated to extended family." He began reading. Names Lena barely recognized, amounts that didn't matter to her, jewelry pieces she had never seen. Her grandmother's life, reduced to a list. She sat still, hands folded in her lap, listening without reacting. Then, he paused. Just for a moment. His eyes lifted from the page to her face. "To Lena Morrissey," he said, "the property located on Aldershore, commonly referred to as the Cottage." He set the paper down. "The structure," he added, "is in poor condition. Significant deterioration. The land itself holds minimal value. Taxes are modest, but ongoing." His tone softened slightly. Most would consider it a liability. From the corner of the room, someone laughed. Lena hadn't noticed them at first. Two people, distant relatives, she realized, sat along the wall, coats still on, watching the proceedings like it was something to pass the time. "A liability," one of them repeated under their breath. "That's one way to put it." The others shook their head, a faint smile tugging at their mouth. Burden dressed as a gift. Lena didn't look at them. She kept her eyes on Marcus Bell. He didn't acknowledge the comment, but something in his gaze shifted, just slightly. He was watching her now. Not openly, not enough to be called out, but closely. As if her reaction mattered more than the words he was saying. Lena felt it. That quiet attention, the way a person listens for something beneath what's being said. She didn't give him anything, just nodded once. "What do I need to sign?" she asked. The question seemed to surprise him, only for a second. Then the practiced calm returned. "Here," he said, sliding a set of papers across the desk. "Acknowledgement of transfer. Standard documentation." She took the pen. It felt heavier than it should have. For a moment, she hesitated. Not because she didn't understand. Because she did. This was it. No job. No savings, no other options. Just a house no one wanted. She signed. Marcus Bell watched the pen move across the page. When she finished, he gathered the papers, aligning them carefully before setting them aside. Then he reached into a drawer, pulled out a small object, and placed it on the desk between them. A key. Old, rusted, the metal worn smooth in places from years of use. "The cottage is yours," he said. Lena picked it up. It was colder than the room. For a moment, she turned it over in her fingers, feeling its weight, its edges. Behind her, one of the relatives let out a soft, amused breath. "Good luck with that," they said. Lena stood. She didn't respond, didn't look back. Marcus Bell remained seated, his hands folded now on the desk. "Ms. Morrissey," he said as she reached the door. She paused. "If you find the property difficult," he continued, choosing his words carefully, "there are options. Selling, for instance. I'd be happy to assist." Lena glanced over her shoulder. He was smiling, but his eyes, they weren't. "I'll keep that in mind," she said. Then she stepped out into the cold. The wind hit her again, sharp and immediate. She stood there for a moment on the sidewalk, the key still in her hand, the lake somewhere beyond the buildings. A burden dressed as a gift. She closed her fingers around the metal, then turned back toward the road. The key felt heavier now, not just in her hand, but in the way it seemed to pull her forward, whether she was ready or not. The sky had dimmed while she was inside, late afternoon slipping toward evening, the kind of light that flattened everything into gray and shadow. Lena walked to the car, opened the door, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The town was quiet in that same watchful way. The man at the gas station was gone now. The street empty again, only the wind moving through it, carrying the faint smell of lake water and old wood. She looked once more at the legal office in the mirror. Then she drove. By the time she reached the cottage again, the light was almost gone. The lake had darkened into something heavier, the waves still moving, but slower now, deeper. The wind came in steady from the water, colder than before, slipping through every gap in her coat. She parked where she had earlier. The house stood exactly the same. Leaning silent, waiting. Lena stepped out, boots crunching on the frozen dirt. She paused at the base of the porch steps, looking up. It didn't look any more welcoming now than it had hours ago. If anything, less. The shadows had settled into the cracks and gaps, making them deeper. The broken window caught the last of the light like a dull eye. She reached into her pocket and took out the key. For a second, she just held it. Then she climbed the steps. One creaked sharply under her weight, another dipped slightly, and she shifted her balance without thinking, testing it before putting her full weight down. At the door, she hesitated. The wood was swollen from years of damp air. The frame slightly warped. She tried the handle first. It didn't move. Then she fitted the key into the lock. It resisted at first, rust grinding softly. She turned it slowly, applying pressure until something inside gave with a dull, stubborn click. The door didn't open. She pushed. Nothing. The wind pressed against her back as if urging her forward. She stepped back, then leaned her shoulder into the wood and pushed harder. For a moment, it held. Then, suddenly, it gave. The door cracked open with a rough groan, the sound loud in the quiet air. A breath of cold, stale air drifted out. It smelled like dust. Old wood. Something faintly damp. Lena stood there for a second, looking into the dark. Then she stepped inside. The floor creaked under her weight immediately. Wide boards, worn smooth in some places, rough in others. The sound echoed through the empty space as if the house hadn't heard footsteps in a long time. She reached back and pulled the door closed behind her. The wind dropped away, replaced by a deeper silence. It took a moment for her eyes to adjust. There was just enough light coming through the cracked window and the gaps in the boards to make out shapes. A small room. A table. 2 chairs, one leaning slightly to the side. A narrow doorway leading deeper into the house. The air was colder inside than outside. That surprised her. She moved forward slowly, her hand brushing lightly along the wall. Dust clung to her fingertips. She found the window and tested it. It rattled in its frame. The crack through the glass let in a thin line of wind that cut across the room like a blade. She stepped back, rubbing her hands together for warmth. "All right," she murmured, her voice sounding different in the empty space. "We'll figure it out." The words felt strange, not hopeful, just necessary. That first night came faster than she expected. By the time she went back out to the car for what little she had, the sky had gone fully dark. The lake was no longer visible, only the sound of it, steady and distant. She brought in the duffel bag, set it on the table, looked around. There was no power, no visible heat source she trusted enough to use yet. She found a corner of the room where the floor seemed more stable and sat down, pulling her coat tighter around her. The cold settled in quickly. It came through the walls, the floor, the air itself. She tried to shift, to find a position that held warmth longer, but it didn't matter. It was everywhere. Outside, the wind picked up again. The house responded. A low creak in the beams. A faint rattle somewhere deeper inside. The broken window tapping softly with each gust. Lena leaned her head back against the wall. Closed her eyes. For a moment, she let herself imagine something else. A small apartment. A working heater. A kitchen light left on overnight without thinking about the cost. Then she opened her eyes again. The dark room came back. She exhaled slowly. "Tomorrow," she said under her breath. "Start tomorrow." The morning didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like something that had never stopped. Cold. Still. The light came in gray through the window, revealing more than it had the night before. More damage. More wear. But also structure. The table, though old, was solid. The walls beneath the peeling layers held firm. The floor creaked, but it didn't shift. Lena stood slowly, stretching the stiffness from her joints, her breath still visible in the air. She stepped outside first. The cold hit her again, sharp and clean, but the light made it easier to take. She walked the perimeter of the house. Slowly, carefully, noticing. The siding had been repaired in places. Not recently, but not as long ago as the rest. Boards replaced, nails that didn't match the older ones. She paused at one section near the back, ran her fingers over it. Different. Whoever had done that hadn't just covered damage, they'd reinforced it. Lena stepped back, looking at the whole structure again. It was falling apart, but not evenly. That stayed with her. By midday, she had done what she could with what she had. Plastic from an old tarp she found behind the house. Tape from the glove compartment. She patched the worst of the window, pressing the plastic tight against the frame, sealing out some of the wind. Not all, but enough to notice the difference. Inside, she opened one of the cans she had brought. Ate slowly, carefully. Every bite measured. That was when she noticed the first sign she wasn't alone out here. Not in the house, but near it. A small metal object leaned against the side of the porch. A crowbar. Old but not rusted through, She hadn't seen it the night before. She was certain of that. Lena stood there, looking at it, then glanced toward the road. Nothing. Just the trees, the lake beyond them, the wind moving through both. She stepped down, picked it up. It was solid useful. She turned it in her hands once, then set it just inside the doorway. Not questioning it. Not yet. The second night was a little different. Still cold, still quiet, but not as sharp. The patched window held. The wind didn't cut through the same way. Lena sat at the table this time instead of the floor, the duffel bag beside her, the key resting in front of her on the wood. She traced it once with her finger, then leaned back in the chair, listening. The house still creaked. The lake still moved. But beneath all of that, there was something else. Not a sound. A feeling. Faint. Hard to place. Like the house wasn't just empty, like it had been kept. In some way. She didn't have the words for it, didn't try to. She just sat there, letting the thought settle without forcing it into shape. Outside, the wind shifted again. Inside, the house held. Lena pulled her coat tighter around her and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she would look closer. Morning came in layers. First the cold, then the light. Gray again, but clearer than the day before. The kind of light that didn't warm anything, just revealed it. Lena opened her eyes slowly, her body stiff from the chair. Her neck ached. Her hands felt thick, slow to move. She flexed her fingers, watching the joints wake up one by one. For a moment, she didn't move, just listened. The house had settled into a rhythm overnight. Small creaks, a distant shift in the beams, the faint whistle of wind along the edges of the patched window. And beneath it, that same feeling. Not quite right, not quite wrong. Just unfinished. She stood, her boots scraping softly against the floorboards. "Let's see what you're hiding," she murmured. The words surprised her. She wasn't the kind of person who talked to empty houses, but this one didn't feel empty. She started with the doorframe. The wood there had caught her attention the day before. The warp in it wasn't unusual. Houses near water always shifted over time, but the way it had been braced was. She ran her fingers along the inner edge. New nails. Not shiny, but newer than everything around them. The heads slightly different. The spacing more careful. Whoever had done it hadn't rushed. They'd measured. Lena pressed her thumb against one of the nails, testing it. Solid. She leaned back, looking at the whole frame. "This wasn't just patched," she said quietly. "It was reinforced." The word stayed in her mind as she moved on. The back wall told a similar story. From a distance, it looked like any other weathered surface. Gray boards, uneven from years of exposure. Up close, differences. Subtle, but there. Some boards had been replaced entirely. Others had been doubled. Thin strips added along the seams, as if to strengthen what was already there. She tapped one with her knuckles. A dull, firm sound. Not hollow, not weak. She stepped back again, narrowing her eyes. The roof sagged. The porch leaned. The windows were cracked and failing. But the bones were holding. Stronger than they should have been. Lena circled the house slowly. Her breath came steady now, less visible than it had been the day before. The patched window held against the wind, though the plastic fluttered faintly at the edges. She moved past the side of the house and stopped. There was a structure there she hadn't noticed in the fading light before. A small shed. Set a few yards back from the main house, half hidden by brush and a line of low trees. She walked toward it carefully. The ground was uneven, patches of frozen mud and old leaves crunching under her boots. Up close, the shed looked older than the house, the wood darker, the roof slanted more sharply. But the door didn't match. Lena reached out and touched the hinge. Cold metal. Clean. Not rusted through like everything else. She ran her fingers along it, then along the latch. Replaced. Recently? No. But not decades ago either. At some point, someone had taken the time to fix this door. Why? She stepped back, studying it. The padlock hung loose, not secured. She lifted it. Light. Unlocked. For a second, she hesitated. Then she pulled the door open. Inside, the air was different. Drier. Still cold, but without the damp edge of the house. The space was small. Tools leaned against one wall, a shovel, a rake, a length of rope coiled neatly on a hook. Nothing valuable, nothing that explained the care taken with the hinges. Lena stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The floor was dirt, packed down over time. She crouched, brushing her hand across it. No footprints, no recent movement, just the faint impressions left by long use. She stood again, turning slowly. Nothing out of place. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about it mattered, that the shed wasn't just a shed. She stepped back out and closed the door, letting the latch fall into place. Later, she said, not dismissing it. Just setting it aside. By midday, she was back in the car. The decision had come quietly. Not dramatic, not forced. If the house had been kept, even in pieces, there would be a reason. And if there was a reason, it wouldn't be written on the walls. It would be written somewhere else. The town looked the same as it had the day before. Still. Watching. Lena parked near a low building she hadn't gone into yet. A faded sign above the door read, County Records. The bell above the door gave a tired ring as she stepped inside. The room smelled of paper and time. Shelves lined the walls, boxes stacked in uneven rows, a counter near the back where a woman sat, reading glasses low on her nose, flipping through a file. She looked up briefly. Help you? Lena approached, her steps measured. I'm looking for property records, she said. Aldershore. Old ones, if you have them. The woman studied her for a second, then nodded toward the shelves. Back wall. Anything older than 20 years is in boxes. You'll have to dig. Lena gave a small nod. Thank you. Digging took time. Boxes weren't labeled clearly. Papers stuck together at the edges. Ink faded in places, smudged in others. But Lena didn't rush. She had spent years reading forms, contracts, applications, learning where people made mistakes, where they hid things in plain sight. She worked methodically, stack by stack, year by year, and slowly, patterns began to emerge, names repeated, not unusual, families held land for generations. But then transfers. Quick ones. Too quick. Property moving from one name to another in short spans of time. Prices that didn't match the value. Lena pulled one document closer, ran her finger along the line. Seller, buyer, witness. Her eyes paused. Marcus Bell. She leaned back slightly, then reached for another file. Different year, different property, same name, again and again. Not always the buyer, not always the seller, but always there, somewhere in the paperwork. Watching. Signing. Present. Lena sat very still for a moment. The quiet of the room pressed in around her. Behind her, the woman at the counter turned a page. The sound was louder than it should have been. Lena looked down at the papers spread before her. A cottage no one wanted. A house that had been reinforced when everything else was left to fall apart. A shed with newer hinges. Land changing hands in ways that didn't quite make sense. And one name, threaded through all of it. She gathered the papers slowly. Carefully. Not drawing attention. Not rushing. But not hesitating either. When she stepped back outside, the wind had picked up again. The lake in the distance moved under the gray sky, steady and indifferent. Lena stood for a moment, the cold biting through her coat. Then she looked toward the road that led back to the cottage. Her grip tightened slightly on the papers in her hand. "Yeah," she said under her breath. "Something doesn't add up." And this time, she was certain of it. The drive back felt shorter, not because the road had changed, but because something inside her had. The lake moved beside her, steady and gray, the same as before. The trees leaned in the same way. The wind still pressed against the car in slow, deliberate pushes. But Lena didn't notice those things the same way now. Her mind stayed on the papers, on the names, on Marcus Bell, appearing again and again in places where he didn't quite belong. By the time she reached the dirt road, the light had begun to fade again. She parked in the same spot. The cottage stood waiting. It hadn't changed, but it didn't feel the same. Lena stepped out, closing the car door softly behind her. The cold wrapped around her again, but she barely registered it. She moved straight to the porch. Up the steps. Inside. The air hit her the same way it had the first time. Cold, still, faintly damp. But now she noticed more. The way the floor dipped slightly near the doorway. The way certain boards sounded different under her weight. She closed the door behind her and stood still for a moment, listening. The house creaked. The wind pressed against the patched window. And beneath that, silence. Waiting. Lena set the papers down on the table. Carefully. Then she rolled her shoulders, flexed her hands, and looked around the room. "All right," she said quietly. "Let's take this one piece at a time." She started where she had left off. The back room. The one that had felt unfinished. The floorboards there were darker, worn smoother in some places. She stepped in slowly, shifting her weight as she moved. Listening to the sound beneath her boots. Creak. Solid. Creak. Then a softer sound. Not louder. Not sharper. Just different. She stopped. Looked down. The board beneath her foot didn't look unusual. Same grain, same wear. But when she shifted her weight again, it gave. Not much. Just enough. Lena froze. Her breath slowed. She stepped off the board, then pressed down again. There. A slight movement. Too controlled to be damage. Too clean to be rot. She crouched slowly, her knees stiff from the cold. Her fingers traced the edge of the board. The seam was tight, but not sealed. She pressed her thumb along it. And felt space. Her pulse picked up just a little. "Okay," she murmured, "okay." She stood and went back to the front room. The crowbar rested just inside the doorway where she had left it. She picked it up. The metal felt steady in her hands. Familiar. She returned to the board, knelt again, and this time she slid the edge of the crowbar into the seam. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she applied a little more pressure. The wood resisted. Old, stubborn, but not immovable. She leaned into it, careful, patient. And then a soft crack. The board shifted. Lena held still, listening. The house didn't react. The wind outside continued its steady rhythm. She eased the board up slowly, working it free inch by inch until it lifted enough for her to grasp it. Then she set it aside and looked down. There was a space beneath the floor. Not large, just enough. And inside, a metal tin box, wrapped in cloth that had yellowed with age. Lena didn't move for a second. She just stared at it. The way a person stares at something they've already found, but haven't quite accepted yet. Then she reached down. Her hands were steady. She noticed that. The steadiness. She lifted the box out carefully. It was heavier than it looked. She set it on the floor beside her. The cloth came away easily, folding back to reveal the metal beneath. Scratched, dulled, but intact. She rested her hand on the lid. Cold metal. Cold like the key. Cold like the air in the house. Then she opened it. Inside, paper. Old. Stacked carefully. Bound with twine that had frayed at the edges. She lifted the top bundle. Unwrapped it slowly. Deeds, property records, names she didn't recognize, dates that went back decades. Her eyes moved over them quickly at first, then slower, looking closer, comparing. The signatures. She leaned in, her breath catching slightly. There was something off. Subtle. The same name, written more than once, but not quite the same way. The loops tighter here, looser there. A line that should have curved, straightened. She set the papers down carefully, reached for the next item. A photograph, black and white. Faded. Several people stood together in front of a house. Not this house. Something larger, cleaner. A man and a woman. 2 children. Another older figure at the edge. Their expressions were hard to read, blurred by time, but they were standing close together. Grounded. Like they belonged where they were. Lena turned the photograph over. No writing on the back. She set it aside. And then, the letter. Folded. Tucked beneath the rest. She picked it up. The paper felt different. Thinner. More fragile. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was tight, uneven in places, like it had been written in a hurry or under strain. Lena read the first line, then the second, and then she stopped. Her hand tightened slightly on the page. She went back. Started again. This time slower. Each word settling deeper than the last. Land. Families. Debt that hadn't existed. Signatures taken. Property transferred. All of it done quietly. Carefully. Over time. And at the center of it, a man. Unnamed in the beginning. Described only by what he had done. By how he had done it. Lena's eyes moved down the page. The air in the room felt thinner now, colder. Or maybe that was just her. Then she reached the end. The final lines. The initials. Her breath caught. Just slightly. She stared at them, then read them again. The paper lowered slowly in her hands. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't think. Just sat there on the cold floor, the open box beside her, the lifted board behind her. The house creaked softly around her. The wind pressed against the walls. And somewhere beyond that, the lake moved, steady and indifferent. Lena looked at the papers again. At the photograph, at the letter in her hands. Then toward the front room, toward the table where the records she had copied earlier now rested. Her mind began to move, pieces shifting, connecting. Marcus Bell, appearing in those documents, again and again. And now, this. A history buried under a floor. Hidden, protected, waiting. Her fingers tightened slightly around the letter. "Okay," she said quietly. But this time, the word didn't sound uncertain. It sounded like something else, something sharper. Because whatever this was, it wasn't random, and it wasn't finished. Lena stayed where she was for a long moment, the letter still open in her hands. The cold had crept deeper into the room, but she barely felt it now. Her focus had narrowed, sharpened, pulling everything inward toward the papers spread out in front of her. She read the letter again. Slower this time. Each word measured. The writer hadn't used dramatic language. No long explanations. No pleading tone. Just facts. What had been done. How it had been done. And the quiet admission that it had been allowed to happen. Lena lowered the page and stared at the floor. Then, carefully, she gathered everything, the deeds, the photograph, the letter, and carried them into the front room. She laid them out on the table beside the copies she had brought back from town. For a moment, she didn't touch anything, just looked. Old paper and newer copies side by side. Different sources. Same story trying to push its way through. "All right," she said under her breath. "Let's see." She started with the deeds from the box, then the ones from the records office, lining them up, matching names, dates, locations. At first it was just noise, too many details, too many overlaps. But Lena didn't rush. She had spent years learning how to read through confusion, how to find the one thing that didn't belong. She picked one name, followed it across the documents. A family, listed as owners of a stretch of land along the lake decades ago. Then, a transfer. Quick. Too quick. The amount listed didn't match the size of the property. She moved to the next document. Same family, different paper, same signature. But not quite. Lena leaned in. Her eyes narrowed. The shape of the letters matched, but the pressure didn't. One was heavier, the other lighter. A slight hesitation in one line that didn't exist in the other. She picked up the letter from the box again. Read the section describing signatures. Forgery. Practiced. Repeated until it passed. Lena set the letter down slowly, then reached for another set of documents. Another name. Another transfer. Another signature. And there it was again. Small differences. Easy to miss. Impossible to ignore once you saw them. She exhaled slowly. "Someone got good at this," she murmured. Her eyes moved to the column of names on the side of the document. Seller, buyer, witness. And there, Marcus Bell. Not always in the same place. Sometimes listed as a witness, sometimes representing one side or the other. But always there. Lena sat back in the chair. The wood creaked under her. She stared at the name, then reached for another paper. Another year. Another property. Marcus Bell. Again. And again. Not a mistake. Not a coincidence. A pattern. A quiet, steady presence in the middle of every transaction that didn't make sense. Lena's hand rested flat on the table, her fingers pressed lightly against the paper. He was there, she said softly. The words sounded strange in the empty room. He was always there. The photograph sat off to the side. She picked it up again, held it closer to the light. The family stood together in front of a house that looked nothing like the cottage. Clean lines, straight roof. Windows intact. The kind of place that didn't lean, didn't sag, didn't wait to be forgotten. She looked at the people more carefully this time. The man at the center, his stance, the way his shoulders were set. Not wealthy, but steady. The woman beside him, close, grounded. The children, young, unaware of anything beyond the moment the picture had been taken. Lena turned the photo over again, still blank. No names, no date, just the image. She set it down slowly, then reached for the letter again. The final lines stayed with her. Not the details, not the description of what had been done, but the tone, not anger, not even regret exactly. More like something left unfinished. Something passed forward. Lena folded the letter carefully, set it beside the rest. Then she stood. The chair scraped lightly against the floor. She moved toward the window. The plastic covering shifted slightly in the wind, letting in thin strips of gray light. Outside, the lake moved the same as it always had. Unchanged, unconcerned. She watched it for a long moment, then turned back to the table. The pieces were there. Not complete, but enough. More than enough to know what she was looking at. This wasn't just a house. It wasn't just a forgotten property at the edge of a quiet town. It was part of something that had been hidden, protected, and left behind. Her grandmother hadn't kept this place for no reason. That much was clear now. The repairs, the reinforcement, the way the worst parts had been allowed to fall apart while the structure underneath held strong. It hadn't been about living here. It had been about keeping something in place. Safe. Until Lena stopped that thought before it finished. She wasn't ready to follow it yet. Instead, she gathered the papers again, stacked them carefully, tied the older ones back with the frayed twine, placed the letter on top. Then she looked toward the open section of floor in the back room. The board still lifted, the space beneath it exposed. She walked back slowly, knelt again. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she placed the box back inside, covered it, set the board down over it, pressing it into place, not sealing it, just returning it. Her hand rested there for a second. Then she stood. The light outside had shifted again. Darker now. Evening settling in. Lena moved through the house, checking what she could. The door. The window. The crowbar still resting near the entrance. Everything as it had been. But nothing felt the same. She returned to the table, sat down, and looked at the papers one more time. Marcus Bell. The name stayed there. Clear. Unavoidable. He had handed her the key, called the house worthless, offered to help her sell it. Too quickly, too easily, and all the while, his name had been sitting in these records. Buried. Waiting. Lena leaned back slowly in the chair. Her eyes moved to the door, then back to the table. He didn't expect anyone to look, she said. The words came out quiet, but certain. Because why would he? A broken house. A woman with nothing. $41. No reason to dig. No reason to stay. Except she had. And now she knew. The wind rose again outside. Stronger this time. It pushed against the walls, testing them. The house creaked in response. But it held. Lena sat there in the dim light, the papers spread out before her, the name repeating in her mind. Marcus Bell. A man who had stood in that office with careful hands and a steady voice. A man who had watched her too closely. A man who had told her the house wasn't worth anything. Her gaze hardened slightly. Not anger, not yet, just clarity. Because whatever this was, whatever had been done, it had started long before she arrived. And it hadn't ended. Not yet. Lena sat in the dim light a while longer, the papers spread across the table, the name still resting there like something that refused to be ignored. Marcus Bell. It wasn't just a connection anymore. It was a direction. She gathered the documents slowly, stacking them in order. The older ones went back into the tin box. The newer copies she kept separate, folding them neatly and sliding them into the inside pocket of her coat. The letter she held a moment longer, then folded it carefully and placed it with the rest. The board in the back room went down again, pressed into place with quiet care. If someone walked through the house now, they wouldn't see it. That mattered. She didn't know exactly why yet, but she trusted the instinct. The next morning came sharper, clearer. Not warmer, but brighter. Lena stepped outside early, the cold air biting harder against her face, but her mind already moving ahead of it. She stood on the porch for a moment, looking out toward the road. Nothing moved. The same stillness, the same quiet. But it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt watched, not by anyone she could see, but by something that had been waiting longer than she had. She went back inside, gathered her coat, and checked the table again. Everything in place. Everything accounted for. Then she stepped out and closed the door behind her. The town looked no different in daylight. Same buildings, same quiet. But now Lena noticed more. The way people glanced at her and then looked away. The way conversations paused when she stepped into the grocery store. Not hostile, not welcoming, just aware. She bought a small loaf of bread, a can of soup, counted out the money carefully. The clerk didn't speak much, just nodded once and handed her the change. When Lena stepped back outside, the wind caught her again, pushing at her coat. She adjusted it and turned toward her car. That was when she saw him. Marcus Bell. Standing near the edge of the street, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding a folder. He hadn't been there when she went in, but he was there now, waiting. Lena slowed, but didn't stop. He stepped forward just enough to meet her path. "Ms. Morrissey," he said, his voice the same as before. Even. Measured. A moment. She looked at him. Really looked this time. Same careful posture, same controlled expression. But now she saw the edges of it. The way his eyes held just a little too steady. The way his attention fixed on her without wavering. "What is it?" she asked. He gave a small, polite smile. "I wanted to follow up regarding the property," he said. "Make sure you've settled in. These things can be overwhelming." Lena didn't answer right away. She shifted the bag in her hand. The loaf of bread felt heavier than it should have. "I'm managing," she said. His gaze flickered just for a second, then returned. "I imagine you've noticed the condition," he continued. "The structure presents certain risks, liability concerns, not to mention the cost of bringing it up to standard." He paused, watching her reaction. "You might consider a more practical solution," he added. "Selling, for instance. There are interested parties, quiet ones." Lena felt something tighten slightly in her chest. Not fear, not yet. Just recognition. "You're offering to help with that?" she asked. "Of course," he said smoothly. "It would simplify things for you. Remove a burden. The word landed the same way it had in the office. Lena studied him, the way he stood, the way he spoke. Nothing rushed, nothing careless, but there was something underneath it now, something she hadn't fully seen before. Not just interest. Intent. "I'll think about it," she said. Marcus Bell nodded once, as if that had been the answer he expected. "Take your time," he said, "but not too much. These matters tend to move whether we're ready or not." He stepped back then, letting her pass. Lena walked to her car without looking back, but she felt it. His eyes on her. All the way until she closed the door. The notice arrived that afternoon. Slipped under the door while she was outside checking the back wall again. Lena saw it the moment she stepped inside. A white envelope against the worn wood floor. Clean. Out of place. She picked it up slowly. Her name printed clearly across the front. No return address. She opened it at the table. The paper inside was thicker than it needed to be. Official. Carefully worded. She read it once. Then again. The meaning settled in piece by piece. Property under review. Structural hazard. Disputed ownership concerns. Inspection required. Access to be granted. Time frame. Short. Very short. Lena lowered the paper. Her hand rested on the table. Still. He wasn't waiting. That much was clear. Whatever patience he had shown before, it was gone now. This wasn't about advice or concern. It was movement. Direct, deliberate. She looked toward the back room, toward the floor, toward the space beneath it. "He's not after the house," she said quietly. The words felt solid. Certain. He's after what's inside it. The realization didn't bring panic. It brought focus. Lena moved quickly, but not carelessly. She gathered the papers again. All of them. The originals. The copies. The letter. Everything. She sat down at the table and began sorting. Organizing. Grouping by date. By name. By connection. Her movements were steady. Precise. The same way they had been when she fixed things years ago. You didn't rush a repair. You understood it. Piece by piece, she found a notebook in the car, brought it inside, and started writing. Names, Dates, connections, Marcus Bell appearing again and again, threading through it all. By the time the light began to fade, the table was covered, the pattern clearer now, stronger. Not complete, but enough. More than enough. Lena leaned back slightly, her eyes moving over everything she had laid out. This wasn't just something she had found. It was something that had been left, intentionally, carefully, for someone to see. Her gaze shifted to the envelope still lying open on the table. Inspection required. Access to be granted. He would come here. Not himself, maybe, but through others. Through paper. Through process. And if he got inside, if he found what was hidden, it would be gone. Like it had never existed. Lena sat very still for a moment. Then she nodded once. A small, quiet movement. Not happening, she said. That night felt different. The cold was still there. The wind still pressed against the house. But inside, there was movement. Purpose. She worked by what light she had, organizing, copying what she could by hand, comparing, noting every detail. The house creaked around her. But it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it was holding something. Waiting. Lena stopped only when her hands began to slow. When the lines in her notebook blurred slightly. She set the pen down, looked over the table one last time, then began gathering everything again. Carefully. Deliberately. Because now, it wasn't just about finding the truth. It was about keeping it. Morning came hard. Not from the cold this time, from the weight of what Lena knew. She had slept in short pieces, waking more than once to the sound of the wind pressing against the walls, the house shifting under it. Each time her eyes went straight to the table, to the papers, to the evidence laid out like something Oleft saw. When she finally stood, her body ached in places she hadn't noticed before, but her mind was already moving. She gathered the documents again, slower this time, not just stacking them. Choosing. The originals went back into the tin box. Carefully. The board lifted once more, the space beneath it revealed, and she slid the box inside before pressing the wood back into place. Her hand lingered there. Then she stood. The copies stayed with her. Folded. Tucked inside her coat, close. She stepped outside into a morning that felt sharper than the last. The lake was restless. The wind had picked up overnight, pushing waves harder against the shore. The sound carried all the way up to the cottage now, a steady, low impact that repeated itself over and over. Lena stood on the porch, watching it for a moment. Then she turned toward the road. The drive inland felt longer. The lake fell away behind her, replaced by thicker trees and narrower roads. The town passed quietly, barely noticing her. She didn't stop this time. Not at the store, not at the gas station. She followed a different set of directions now. Names from the papers. One in particular. Calder. It had come up more than once, not as often as Marcus Bell, but enough, and always tied to the earlier transfers. Before things began to shift, before the patterns became clear. Lena drove slowly, checking the numbers on the mailboxes as she passed. The houses thinned out, then spaced farther apart. Then, she saw it. A small place set back from the road, partially hidden by a line of old trees. The paint had faded to a dull, uneven color. The roof sagged slightly at one end, but it was standing. Holding together. She pulled the car to a stop, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment. Her hand rested on the papers in her coat pocket. She didn't take them out yet. She stepped out of the car. The air here was quieter. Less wind. More stillness. The kind that settled deeper. She walked up the narrow path toward the house. Each step deliberate. Measured. At the door, she hesitated. Not because she was unsure, but because she understood something now. Once she knocked, things would move. She raised her hand, knocked twice. The sound echoed lightly through the wood. Then she waited. It took a moment, then longer. And just when she thought no one would answer, the door opened, only a few inches at first. A face appeared in the gap. Older, lined with time, eyes that didn't soften easily. "Yes?" the woman said. Her voice was steady, careful. Lena met her gaze. "My name is Lena Morrissey," she said. "I'm looking for Ruth Calder." The woman didn't move, didn't open the door any wider. "You found her," she said. Lena nodded once. "I was hoping to speak with you." Ruth Calder studied her, from her face, to her coat, to the way she stood, taking everything in. "Then what about?" she asked. Lena reached into her coat slowly, carefully. She pulled out one of the copied documents, held it out. "I think you already know," she said. Ruth's eyes dropped to the paper. For a moment, nothing changed. Then something flickered, quick, controlled. But there. She opened the door a little wider. "Come in," she said. The inside of the house was warmer. Not much, but enough to take the edge off. The space was small, clean, everything in its place. Lena stepped in, closing the door behind her. Ruth moved ahead, setting a chair near the table. "Sit," she said. Lena did. She placed the paper on the table between them. Ruth didn't touch it right away. She stood there, looking down at it. Then slowly, she reached out, picked it up. Her hands were steady. But Lena noticed the way her fingers tightened slightly at the edges. She read it once, then again, her jaw set. "That name," Ruth said quietly. Lena didn't respond. Ruth looked up, her eyes sharper now. "Where did you get this?" "From my grandmother's house," Lena said. The words hung in the air. Ruth's gaze didn't shift. "Which house?" she asked. "The one on Alder Shore." Something changed. Not in her posture, not in her voice, but deeper. Recognition. "That place," Ruth said, almost to herself. Lena reached into her coat again. This time she pulled out the photograph, placed it beside the document. Ruth looked at it, and this time she didn't hide the reaction. Her breath caught. Just slightly. Her hand moved toward the photo, stopped, then continued. She picked it up, held it closer. The silence stretched. Then Ruth let out a slow breath. "I haven't seen this in years," she said. Her voice had shifted now, not softer, but heavier. Lena leaned forward slightly. "They lost the land," she said. "Didn't they?" Ruth didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the photograph. "They didn't lose it," she said finally. "They were pushed out of it." The words settled into the room. Quiet. Final. Lena let that sit. Then she spoke again. I found a letter, she said. It describes how. Ruth's eyes lifted, sharp again. Who wrote it? She asked. Lena hesitated. Just for a second. Then, I don't know his name, she said. Not for certain, but he knew what happened. He was there. Ruth studied her, looking for something. Then her gaze dropped back to the paper, to the signature. Her fingers pressed lightly against it. He was part of it, she said. Marcus Bell. Lena didn't say the name. She didn't need to. Ruth already had. The room felt smaller now, the air tighter. He told us it was legal, Ruth continued. All of it. Every paper, every signature. Her hand trembled slightly, then stilled. We signed because we didn't know any better, she said, and because by the time we understood, it was too late. Lena leaned back slowly. The chair creaked under her. He's still here, she said. Ruth's eyes flicked to hers. Of course he is, she said. The answer came too quickly, too certain. Lena felt something settle into place. He's trying to take the house, she said. Ruth let out a quiet breath, not surprised. Then he knows, she said. Lena shook her head slightly. Not everything, she said. Not yet. Ruth watched her. Long. Careful. Then she set the photograph down. You should leave, she said. The words came without warning. Flat. Final. Lena didn't move. I'm not going to, she said. Ruth's gaze hardened. You don't understand what you're stepping into, she said. This isn't something you fix by digging around in old papers. I'm not trying to fix it, Lena said. Ruth paused. That caught her. Then what are you trying to do? She asked. Lena met her eyes. Finish it, she said. The words stayed there, between them. Ruth looked at her for a long time. Then she leaned back slowly in her chair. The tension in her shoulders didn't disappear, but it shifted. You sound like him, she said quietly. Who? The man who wrote that letter, Ruth said. Lena didn't respond. Ruth's eyes moved back to the photograph, then to the document, then to Lena. You're already in it, she said, whether you walk away or not. Lena nodded once. I know. The room fell quiet again. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Soft, distant. Ruth folded her hands on the table, her gaze steady now. Not fearful. Not yet. But no longer closed. Lena stood slowly. I'm not asking you to do anything, she said. Ruth didn't answer. I just needed to know I wasn't wrong, Lena added. Ruth looked at her. And this time, she gave a small nod. Not agreement, but recognition. Lena turned toward the door, opened it. The cold air came in again. She stepped outside, paused, then looked back once. Ruth was still sitting at the table, the photograph in front of her, her hand resting near it. Not touching, but close. Lena closed the door gently behind her and walked back to the car. The road felt different now. Not uncertain, not unclear, just narrow. Like it had always been leading somewhere specific. She started the engine, turned back toward the lake, toward the house, toward everything that was waiting there. Because now, she wasn't just holding something, She was part of it. And she wasn't turning away. The wind off the lake hit harder that evening, pushing against the cottage like it always had, like it always would. Lena stood on the porch with the key in her hand, the same one she'd almost seen as a burden. Inside, the floor was quiet again. The board lay flat, hiding what it had held for so long. Not gone, just protected. She thought about the woman at the table, the way her hand had hovered over that photograph, not touching it, but not letting it go either. $41. That was all she had when she came here. $41, and a place nobody wanted. And somehow, that had been enough to uncover something no one else had dared to look at. Lena stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The house creaked once, then settled, like it recognized her now. She didn't rush to the table, didn't go straight to the papers. She just stood there. Because for the first time, she understood why her grandmother had never let this place go. Not because it was worth anything, but because it wasn't finished. Lena ran her hand along the wall, feeling the rough wood, the places where it had been repaired, held together just enough to last. Most people would have walked away, sold it, forgotten it. But the house hadn't needed someone to live in it. It had needed someone who would stay long enough to see what everyone else missed. Outside, the lake kept moving, steady and endless. Inside, Lena finally set the key down on the table, not as something she had been given, but as something she had chosen to keep. She drew a slow breath and looked around the room again. Not broken, not worthless, just waiting. And she thought, how many things in a person's life look like the end, when they're really just the one place no one else was willing to stand? What would you have done if that had been your $41?